uphill, we're still focusing on those outputs, on those designs, on those features. I'm not saying that's not important or crucial. These are. But they're crucial only if they're meaningful to the user and they contribute to business success. Right? So this gives us a unique challenge and an opportunity for user experience. Now we all understand user experience is not just about ensuring usability, we know that. But done well, it should directly be influencing retention, revenue, and competitive differentiation. Right? So Jacob Nielsen famously said, a wonderful interface to the wrong feature will fail. Right? So a most well-designed interface to the wrong, misaligned product is destined for irrelevance, both for the users and for the business. So we have a unique opportunity to play the part where we are able to highlight the most meaningful user problems and dedicate the effort and time of product development to address those problems. However, we need to do that in a manner, we have to do that effectively by actually also connecting the dots to the business. So those user-centric outcomes that also directly impact the business, that's our sweet spot, right? In other words, we need to articulate that value in terms that resonate with our business stakeholders. I've already heard this theme in a few of the sessions from this morning, and I think you'll hear a lot more of that. And this is a very important point I'm making because that influence of the stakeholders is going to be critical not just for your success as a practitioner, but perhaps for the health of our function itself. Now, I'm saying this, it sounds like a dire thing, but it is important. It is at a crucial time where there is a lot of this buzz about the outcomes because the pressures of the modern market are pretty relentless right now, right? Of course, we have the usual competition, maybe even increased. We have the advent of AI and automation, and everybody is trying to race and trying to do some innovation, transform, do things around these technologies. And then, of course, don't forget we have those other monsters that we've already been wrestling, and we continue to wrestle. No signs of taming down. Security, growing and scaling your platform, making those things be more robust. These are things that we're still working on. And then there are all these new challenges. And of course, all in the light of this economic uncertainty, right? So where organizations have to think about reducing costs, unfortunately, right? So in this scenario, companies are realizing it's not enough to simply just deliver outputs. They have to demonstrate tangible impacts to outcomes. So those outcomes are, of course, bottom line and customer satisfaction. Now, in this slide, if you as a UXer are not able to connect your job or your work to that bottom line and that customer satisfaction, depending on the maturity of your organization in terms of how they value user experience, either your function is at risk or definitely some of your initiatives are at risk, right? So what do we do about this? This is why it's important for us to embrace that outcome mindset. And my talk is going to walk you through a practical approach in building that muscle by sort of leading into your own design process. So let's start at the beginning and align at what we mean by outputs and outcomes. Now, an output is simply a deliverable, a product or a service. It's like launching a website, okay? An outcome is something, a benefit you get from that output. So for instance, an increased user engagement with your brand because of that website, that's an outcome. So if an output is a what, the outcome is a so what, why, right? I'll give you another example. One of my teams is a accessibility team, so a team of accessibility experts. The way that they were measuring success was the number of awareness meetings that they were having across the organization. Very useful, don't get me wrong, but that's an output. What the outcome is that the products are actually accessible and inclusive, and that we, the company, or offering that product, is the leader in the space for offering the most accessible solution. Right? That's the outcome. So for us to understand the difference and make sure that our pulse is on the outcome is super important. Now, an outcome mindset is always Western, it's not simply a fleeting trend. but rather a strategic imperative that sort of goes down through the layers of the organization. That's sort of where the magic happens, when everybody is sort of aligned with the same shared vision and purpose. And then cross-functionally, we are all measured by the same desired business outcomes. Then naturally there is more synergy, right? To identify the biggest problems that give us the best bang for the buck, the best return on investment, right? We can't always have this sort of a big transformation. I was lucky to be part of one, but it's not something we can trigger or control. But the good news here is that UX practice is naturally supportive of this kind of outcome thinking. So you can start with your work, with your collaborations, and build it out like that. And the benefits of this outcome-based thinking, I think, is pretty high, and I'm pretty confident that even going bottom up, there's going to be a significant impact. So as a broad guideline, I'm going to give you these 3 questions to think about as your basic mantra, right? Why are we doing this? How will the world change because of this? And how will we measure success? Apply these 3 questions no matter where you are in the design process. And that will help you connect your work to those value-driven outcomes. Beyond that, I want to go through that framework I was talking about based off of our own design process. When you look at these steps here, most of them should seem familiar to you as part of your own process. But the first one is something we frequently neglect to do, and that is aligning UX with business outcomes deliberately, right? When we think of discovery, usually we think about uncovering user pain points and opportunities through research. But it's just as important to discover what are those business outcomes that we are going after cross-functionally. And so for that, UXers first need to play the role of facilitators and collaborators, right, to get to that, to get to those concrete business objectives. Some examples are here on the slide, right? So, increase customer retention by 10%, reduce customer support by whatever percentage, right? Things like that, they're very concrete. If you know where you are today and you know where you want to be, then you can get a sense of, is this an incremental thing or a big leap you're about to make? That can change your strategy of how you think about approaching it, right? Not having that idea will just make you go, just shoot in the dark, right? So now I also understand that UXers, we are not very comfortable talking about business objectives and getting that concrete and all that. And I invite you to think about it and let that comfort come in. That's a muscle we need to build. Because it's really important for us to understand what our stakeholder priorities are, like I said, so that we can then tailor our approach and ensure that we're all aligned. Otherwise, when we come just with user advocacy, then what happens is that we may not get the support or the funding. It's just frustrating. You're not making any impact after all because nothing you want is getting executed anyways. To gain some more comfort with this kind of, talking about business metrics, I would also encourage you to do some pre-research. Pre-research in terms of like the product and the problem space, so that you demonstrate some level of familiarity, and that then allows you to have deeper conversations. You don't want to be the person in the room with the least information or the least knowledge, because then they just have to catch you up, and then you don't get to the point of having a deeper conversation. So some pre-research is a good idea. Once we have this alignment though, and once you're able to have these sorts of conversations, now you're beginning to be viewed as a strategic partner, not just as a function that is reacting to, a service provider, right? There's reaction to the service provider. So, and when you have this alignment, this then becomes the foundation for your design brief, and also the focus for your research itself. What is it now? Now that I understand where we're going, what are those, not just the user needs and opportunities, but what are those opportunities that I can uncover for those business goals like retention, adoption, things like that. So before we move to that next phase, one more thing that we need to align early on, and that is aligning on what success looks like. And when I talk about this, I'm not talking just about what success looks like for the whole project or that initiative, but what success looks like for that experience, right? And in order for you to be able to again concretely define what success looks like, you do need to pick a couple metrics that you're able to roll up to the level of the product suite or the feedback product itself. So So that way then you're able to measure progress and success. And you can also, in the beginning of the initiative, get a line and say, here is where we want to go. So this might represent this kind of a score. In our case, we use the SAS and the ACQs. So this is a 10-point SAS score increase. That's a big deal, right? So it's not like you're just doing incremental stuff. It's lip service to that. You're not helping by 10 points. So it really gives you a concrete way to talk about, this is where we want to go, this is what we think we need to do in order to get there to achieve this scores. Okay, so then we go into the research phase. Like I said, think beyond just the user pain points and friction points. That's something that we are good at doing. We are good at spot it anyways. That's something we should continue to do. But along the way, think about how those get mapped to those business outcomes as well. If there's a retention problem, how can I think about those pain points in the lens of that retention problem? So think about it in both of those ways. And to do that effectively, I think we should look past the most common tools that we use, surveys, interviews, usability tests. That sort of keeps us in the realm of the features and the workflows. Also very important, I'm not saying don't do it, but I think we need to tap into some of the other things. Again, now if you know you're building a brand new product, then maybe you're doing more contextual inquiries and learning from the customers, potential customers. If you're doing a big transformation, maybe you're doing a customer journey map or jobs to be done or something like that. Tap the more strategic tool sets is my point here, right? And then you might go about thinking, how do we make room for this? My research slate is already pretty full, right? And so that's where I'll ask you to go and examine your research slate and see why you're doing that research, right? Is it saving dollars? Is it eliminating shelf life? Is it contributing to any of these business outcomes? If not, think about either delegating or not doing it and make room for these. And then when you're making room for this more strategic research, you're not answering a single question. You're exploring a space. And so think about, this is kind of like a gift that keeps on giving, right? You can go back to this research and answer many questions because you have now understood that problem space or that opportunity space available for you. So I'm going to give you some examples from my experience. This is a customer journey map that I created a while ago. Actually, it's just an extract. There's nothing new about this. The format looks pretty familiar, right? But when you marry this with a service blueprint, suddenly you're offering the organization perhaps the very first holistic picture ever, right? Of how the customer experiences their offerings and how we serve it. What have we done in that process? We've thought past, we're thinking seamlessly about the customer experience. We're thinking past just product user experience. We're thinking about CX, UX, everything as a seamless whole, because that's how the customer experiences it, right? And then you're able to look at it across the journey to come up with themes and issues, right? The downside of this is it takes a lot of work, of course. And then when you pass it around an artifact like this, first of all, it might look very nice, and then people have this novelty factor, and they're like, wow, this is amazing. And they look at it for 2 days, and then they forget about it because it's overwhelming. They can't act on it, right? It's too much. So that's where it comes back down to us, our teams, to then go and be relentless in breaking down those insights. And to have your radar be sensitive and sensitive to the signals of where the opportunities are, and then mapping those insights bite-sized so that people can act on that piece when it is most appropriate. And that's how we leverage the research and chip away, right? Because it's so big. Now, this customer journey that I'm showing you insights for, this served us for almost 2 years, right? So you can keep going back to this as long as you think that data is valid, of course. You have to go and update that otherwise. Also, I'd highly encourage you, like I said before, not to focus on single touch points and features, but look across so that you can find patterns and themes to think about. Because when you do that, you're also elevating your influence to that outcome level, right? You're having a much bigger impact on the bigger part of the customer journey or parts of the customer journey. And then, like I said, go back to this sort of deep research again and again to answer different questions. Here's an example, right about in the center towards the bottom, there is a chart that you're seeing. The product team was thinking about wanting to invest more in personalization within our product suite. Okay, so before that big investment, they wanted some research around it. So we went back to this customer journey and we looked at all the places already in the customer journey where personalization was pretty much there, right, at some level or either a lot or some. And then we were able to make some combinations. On hindsight, it might seem pretty common sense, that like most design, but basically the insight was, if the usability is not where it needs to be, no amount of personalization is going to help you retain customers, right? And if retention was why we wanted to add personalization, we needed to ensure that we had this data point. So we offered this data point to our leaders, and of course they factored that in with other considerations and made the decisions that they need to make. But the important point is not where we went. The important point is what we were informing. Right? We were not informing about a particular feature, about a particular design, but rather about a product investment. We were talking about product strategy. We were talking about informing all of that. And that's where you're moving from outputs to outcomes. Another example. Here was a time when our company was trying to gain market share over competitors with some disruption and transformation within the product experience. Of course, we did a competitive analysis, and like everyone, we did what everyone does. Compare like for like screens, lots and lots of them, deep analysis. But before we started, we anchored to some experience principles that we wanted to anchor on as a brand. Okay, so we said these are the experience principles that are important to us. So we were first identifying what we stand for, and then not being copycats. They're doing this, so we'll do this. This is what we stand for, and here's where we stand based off of this yardstick, and here's where we think our competitors are. And then do the deep analysis to get that deep insight, and then zoom out again. And now we took those principles and put them on a scale into experience attributes, something that's a little bit more tangible. And then we put ourselves, and with that deep analysis, our assessment of where those competitors live on those scales. And then here's where our nuance and our judgment, our expertise comes in. Given our outcomes, we think we need to be here on the scale. That's the dot with the tiara. That's the aspirational vision dot, right? And that represents the leaps you need to make, right? And now you have cross-functional alignment. Everyone can see it. They can see the evidence for it. And then when you express it in words, it becomes your North Star UX strategy. Okay? And so now you have a deliberate UX strategy based on the mission that you have aligned on that you want to pursue, and it's based on evidence. Okay? So these are some examples of pulling your research and design hat to arrive at that sort of UX strategy. Okay? Now we're finally at the kickoff. You know, most people start here, but we just got here, right? And even now I'm talking about mapping insights to business outcomes, where traditionally this is where program management will come in, and timelines and deliverables and who's doing what. So you start getting there right in the beginning. But I feel like we do need to have this pre-step, which is we've done all of this alignment, we've uncovered all of these opportunities. Be very structured and deliberate in mapping those opportunities to those priorities. Otherwise, we are just like picking on it organically. Oh, by the way, research said this, or whatever, or cherry picking happens in that manner. So really, to be deliberate, here's a methodology that I have used and I highly recommend. Of course, this is not the only way to do it. You can use other methodologies too. But this is called an opportunity solution tree. It's a method created by Teresa Torres. There's a number of these free templates available on FigJam where you get started right away. But I'll just walk you through very briefly how this works. So you have the purple stickies on the top that represent your desired outcomes. Okay? Then you have the orange stickies, which is basically the opportunities that can map to achieve those outcomes. And then you have the blue stickies, which are really the solutions for any given opportunity, that how you can address or leverage that opportunity. And then the green ones are really experiments that you can run on those solutions to see if one version is better or the other, things like that. That's the basic idea. Now let me give you an example of how we use it. Don't get daunted by this. This was not done in 2 days, or we didn't spend like a week doing this, but rather it was a process, right? right? So again, I also want to mention that this was for a product investment that we wanted to make, where we wanted this product to hugely disrupt the market. So it was going to be a multi-year sort of vision. We wanted to think about how to inform that sort of an investment. So we started first with the pre-kickoff and the leadership level. So UX, product, and engineering leaders got together, and we were able to maybe start at the very beginning, at the very top of the company business goals. Here's what the company wants to do. Break it down enough until we got to the point where those outcomes were concrete for that product investment we were trying to make, that initiative, right? So what you have at the end of it is after a deliberation of the leaders have come to this conclusion, these are the concrete outcomes we are looking for from this product investment. That is really amazing for a team to have that kind of directive, right? Because many times what happens is you assume some things, and late in the game, you have to change directions because that's not what leadership wanted. And that's where the stakeholder opinion comes in late in the game, and that's a lot of frustration. So really to think about having those outcomes defined for you is a blessing. And then the next thing is the product triad comes in, right? So here the lead designer, researcher, lead PM, and engineer, of course, but anybody else that needs to be there. Our mapping out, research has unearthed, and all of these amazing insights around opportunities that we can work on. But are those opportunities, can we map it to those desired outcomes? If not, we'll think about it another day. So you're already filtering the opportunities to where you think it can map to those desired outcomes. So that's already a priority that you're setting. And then maybe there is a design sprint or a workshop or what have you with more members to brainstorm the solutions and think about how we can actually act on those opportunities that we've identified. So if you look from bottom up, you're always going to be able to say how your work connects back to those desired outcomes. Okay, and that's the structure that you have here. Now I also want to point out certain things. I shared the methodology and then I shared a real artifact. And you'll see a lot of creative adaptation here. There are many more levels, there are shades of colors, there are tags that are used, and I invite you to do all of it. Okay, because a methodology is really a means to an end. Right? As long as you're finding ways to connect back and demonstrate why you're doing something, it's all cool. Right? In fact, I was blown away when the team took this. From an opportunity solution tree, this became a strategic product canvas, right? So for instance, the swim lanes that you're seeing here represent years of the vision. Now suddenly they have a 3-year vision for this, right? Where in year 1, they're saying, this is what we're going to prioritize, these opportunities and these solutions. And obviously, when you take a deeper look, you see there are now silos being broken, seams are being addressed, right? Which product needs to do what? Because the desired outcomes are shared across these products. Now these teams know that we're successful only if we make each other successful so that we can reach this desired outcome. And therefore there are all of those things, right? What are the dependencies? Where do we need to come together? So this is a plan now that is taking those broad outcomes into mind and thinking about the mechanics of getting there. Okay. So with all of that, we're now ready to get started with the design phase, where we can actually create the solutions and deliver those UX outcomes. So up until this point, we had a very critical role. We've had a critical role throughout the cycle, but our role was a little bit more around facilitating and making sure that everybody keeps that mindset or the outcome mindset. In this, of course, the hat is squarely on our heads, right? So we have to make sure that we have that outcome-based mindset in our own design, in our own craft. So I want to talk about first being hyper-focused on those design outcomes that we, not design outcomes, business outcomes that we align on. And then having a pragmatic scope. So not balancing innovation with predictable outcomes, balancing pushing the envelope with making sure that you are able to deliver something, right? All of those things are important, and that's what I mean by pragmatic scope. I want to give you an example from my experience again. So we were building a small but brand new product not having that some basic features around that product was causing road bumps early in sales cycles. Okay, so the business driver for this was that we want to have a checkbox to say we have something so that we don't stop short in our sales cycle too early. Okay, and then my designers were working on this, and they had these amazing ideas of leveraging AI and other technologies to make sure that the experience was really seamless and amazing. And they were really surprised at the resistance that they were getting came to me for support. Unfortunately, I had to remind them why we were doing this in the first place. Right? This was meant to be a checkbox. This was meant to be a basic feature. That was the business driver. So really just sticking to that scope is really important. There are those other projects that I talked to you about where I showed you the opportunity solution tree. We have to do the reverse. We have to push our teams to say, we are trying to disrupt here, guys. This is not enough, right? So it's both ways, but really being pragmatic with your scope and understanding that and keeping in mind that is important for ourselves. Then put your superpowers to use, like the curated narratives. They are the sole people in the organization that have the ability to bring to life ideas in very powerful manners. Like with prototypes, high fidelity prototypes, concepts, pitches, and all of those sorts of things. Befores and afters, those are dramatic, right? When you show up before and then when you show well-designed after. Or competitive references. Nothing moves people like competition. So, right, use all of those things in your favor to make sure that you're pushing the agenda. But the agenda is aligned to the business outcome. Okay. Here's some examples from my team's work. These are beautiful storyboards. Those illustrations are gorgeous. They don't need to be. They can be on a flip chart or a whiteboard, and we've done that as well. They can be your markups that you can have a video click through and make a video out of it. The important thing is to have a narrative. Why? Because it keeps the human in the picture. It also talks about the handoffs, the scenes, all of those sorts of things. And it's almost like a reverse press release, right? You already know the story you want to tell. And then as you're evolving your design through the product development process, you use that story. So in the bottom of the screen, you're seeing markups already entered into the storyboard. That's because the storyboard was not used only in the beginning, but throughout the process. So that story became the channel to evolve the thinking. Okay. One more skill that I think we neglect, but we should pay attention to. We are great at coming up with grand vision. Then we hand it to somebody. They don't know what to do with it. They cherry pick, and we get frustrated because that's not what we had intended at all. So how about we put on a little bit of the product hat and think about how to break down that vision, right? How to break down that vision, taking into account, like I said before, operational things, what makes sense from a customer's perspective, how to deliver continuous value, balancing all of those things, and coming up with that. Another example, again, from my experience, we went through a big product merger, product integrations were happening all over the place in a big rebranding effort, right? Of course, we worked really hard in first arriving at the vision for how that rebranding should be. But after that, we had to work just as hard to come up with an execution strategy. And maybe we start just with a couple brand colors, then we swap the font, whatever, right? But basically, under that strategy, we were thinking about what does it mean for the customer in terms of change management, number one. And two, what new things did we have to build? What did we already have? Who's available? Having all of that, when a designer demonstrates that maturity to think beyond just those things, but rather think holistically, and then able to break it down. This is phase one, this is phase two, and this is how we lead up to our vision in this timeline. That's a very powerful, concrete conversation that people have not really expected from designers so far. Once that happens, again, like I said, there is no stopping you from being a strategic partner, and your influence is going to skyrocket from there. People will look to you to say, what should we do next, right? So, I mean, this is my experience. This is what I saw happen. All right, we are coming to the end of the design process here, and our least favorite topic, measurement. Measurement has been long UX's kryptonite, I think. I think it's for some good reason. There's a lot of nuance in our work, and sometimes I feel like our motto is it depends. So I understand all of that, but unfortunately in the business world, measurement is religion, right? As Peter Drucker said, what gets measured gets managed, right? So good news is it's not as if we don't have metrics. We do have metrics. We have usability metrics. We have product usage data that we constantly use. We also have vanity metrics like the one that I mentioned about the accessibility meetings, right? Those sorts of things that we don't need as much. But these other things have a place. But what we don't have enough of, or not at all, is metrics at scale or progress trends. We do work hard sometimes. Some teams work really hard on ROI metrics. I have an opinion about that. When we go to our stakeholders just with ROI metrics, they're already on the defensive because they know there's an ask coming behind that. Right? So they're already on the defensive. But the other metrics, where metrics at scale, progress trends, things like that, you are giving them insight to take action or make some very hard decisions. You're probably removing some blind spots on the experience side, right? That now they have access to because of these data points. And so they're really very grateful for this. And they actually welcome that, and they're happy to correlate that. And now you have a seat at the table because you have metrics that are of interest to them. And that can only happen when your metrics are at the right level, because at the feature level, they're not interested there. They're not at that brain, right? So this is where we selected a couple different metrics here at both the feature level and at the product to suite level. And we chose SEQs and SUS scores. This could be another talk in itself, but I'm going to just give you the high level here. I want to show you, no matter which the brain was, how we've elevated it up to a product suite level. Now, I was telling you our companies went through a big merger and there were lots of product integration. So top priority was product integration. Given that context, again, that's the business context, right? We identified key jobs to be done across those integrating products. Okay, and then we went into a mega usability study, and then we collected the SEQs and arrived at this perception of these scores. And while we could have gone to the individual teams and said, this is your score, right? What we did was we strung them together. And when you string them together, now you have a portrait of what your integration or your suite looks like at the moment, where the friction points are, how severe those friction points are. Then we also went ahead and layered that with what parts are accessible, what parts are not accessible. It's such a rich picture now on what the work is that needs to get done at the suite level. Okay, and this became the basis for a multi-million-dollar UX modernization investment after that. So that's again where we are doing all the right things. We already know how to do this. It's a question of how you put it together and how to make it relevant to your stakeholders to have that next level of influence. And also, for the first time, we had an accessibility OKR where my team was trying to evangelize. Now there was an OKR that everybody had to respond to, and we were able to chip away at making our products more accessible as well. Okay. Now, in a different product suite in the same company, where product integrations was not the mainstay, there were new go-to-market segments that were being defined because of the merger. Go-to-market segments are basically who you're targeting, who's your customer base, right? So we instituted an in-product feedback framework, and we collected the SUS scores on a quarterly basis. And then we started to track these trends. And so we were able to say, yes, we're making progress, but we were also seeing that the new target segments were trailing. So we needed to then say, what we're doing is still maybe not enough for those specific target segments that we need to focus on. So we needed to optimize for that and change our strategy accordingly. So in this case, it became the number 2 priority, where experience was incremental, became the number 2 priority to simplify the experience only after security and platform resilience. Okay. So again, having this sort of data is useful for our decision makers to also make the right priorities. Now you also see where it dipped suddenly. We had a proactive investigation for why that happened. It turned out some of the security enhancements that were creating some other unplanned experience issues, because for the customer everything is experience. And so we were able to mitigate that proactively before it became a huge customer escalation. So think about what I've just been talking about.
We have reprioritized investments and priorities, product roadmaps and product investments, and we have de-escalated a customer situation before it became bad. These are things that we have never ever imagined our research or that we, UXers, can do. This is the type of influence that you can actually have in your organizations. So that's kind of what I wanted to say, but I want to wrap it up with some key takeaways. I want to say that in order to achieve business outcomes, you most definitely need to define UX outcomes. And it's kind of going to go reverse order here. If you want to have UX outcomes, you better have a good, solid strategy that is rooted in that business context. And in order to get to that strategy, that deeper research, where you are sort of tapping your more strategic tool sets, are important to first reveal that opportunity space so that then you can use your strategy, base your strategy on. And then UX professionals definitely need to take that facilitator, collaborator role more seriously. You need to get comfortable with that. And what you need to get more comfortable with is definitely taking accountability for those business results. It's not somebody else's role to make sure that the business succeeds, it's ours too. And if you want to get real with the business, then you better also try to think about measurement and making sure that your impact will be demonstrable at that level as well. So that's my talk. Embrace that outcome-based mindset and really use that mind shift to sort of like not just go past features and think about outcomes in terms of both the user advocacy but also in influencing the growth that the business needs as well. So thank you so much. We have a few minutes. Yeah, okay. So I can take any questions. Oh, sure.
Simple. Are you going to have your slides available for download?
I can make it available.
That would be very helpful because you had a lot there. I couldn't tell you that.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
I'm wondering at a smaller scale, when you're coming in and you're seeing, at whatever point, sort of helping them or bringing value by stepping back a little bit. Have you had the opportunity to say, okay, you didn't get to do that pre-work. It looks like things are breaking down. Have you been able to work with product or other folks to I don't know, backtrack or maybe pivot a little bit?
I mean, there's really no true starting point and true ending point most of the time. I gave you a couple examples where we have that notion of a starting point. So I think any time is a good time to start. If you are spinning, it's a good time to stop and reflect to see, are we spinning because we are all pulling in different directions? Do we know what our leadership wants? Do we know what we are aspiring for? So I don't think there's a true starting point, or I don't think you need to get one work to figure out things further along. You can start at any point.
Yeah, meaning like, product, you're noticing that they didn't do that homework, and you have to say you need to think a little bit.
So one of the things that you can do is to get started, and this is something that I've sort of helped my designers with, right? Have conversations where you simply start by asking why. Why are we doing this? I just want to understand the drivers for this. When they're not able to articulate it, then put on the facilitator role and try to think about helping them, not confrontationally, but helping them arrive at the whys. Because another thing in my previous role, right, we used to do is we used to have leadership reviews. And we stopped doing those presentations as UX is presenting this. It's always going to be UXPM and Dev are presenting it together, because then it's their strategy that is being validated with leadership. And it's not, oh, UX has this opinion, or it's not the us versus them thing. So really just playing the role of the facilitator to get that alignment for everyone. One more question? Yes. Oh, sure.
Do you have recommendations for when product starts to kind of, you agree on an outcome and potentially the features, but then they kind of start to get, I don't want to maybe distract you or maybe influence in a different direction, and they just kind of want you to make what they think, how to get back on track and keep that strategic partnership alive?
Yeah. So I think that's where it's important align on what we're going to be working on and why. Once that alignment is there, and that alignment is now blessed also by your leadership, then you know that this is what I'm signed up to deliver, and then you can use that as a way to keep people back, get them back on track. Like I said, those old habits, they're very, very common. Okay, thank you all so much.